DW Africa Link.
Uganda's human rights record continues to draw global attention for all the wrong reasons. From crackdowns on political opposition and restrictions on free speech to controversial laws targeting marginalized communities, the country has faced mounting criticism from international organizations and activists. With reports of arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearances, and violence against journalists and human rights defenders, a question remains. Why does Uganda remain a hotspot for human rights violations, and what's being done about it? Stay tuned. My name is Josey Mahachi. Welcome to Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter from Africa.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
Ugandan authorities abandoned a bid to try opposition leader Kizza Besigye for treason in a military court, passing the case to a civilian tribunal and prompting him to end his hunger strike. The use of military courts to abduct and try civilians has drawn sharp criticism from human rights organizations and opposition figures. Uganda's Supreme Court ruled that the trial of civilians in a military court is unconstitutional and that such cases must be transferred to ordinary courts. However, the government's rejection of this ruling, claiming that such trials protect the country from criminals, has profoundly impacted the country's human rights situation. On today's podcast, I've invited Uganda's Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, Norbert Mao. A little later, I'll also speak to our correspondent in Kampala, Uganda. Minister Mao, thank you so much for accepting to be part of the podcast. To begin with, give us an overview of the situation in your country and why Ugandans are unhappy with the country's leaders.
I am assuming that you are talking about the matter of trials of civilians in military courts.
Absolutely. And also allegations of kidnappings, opposition figures being arrested, just everything that's been happening that we are reading.
And the matter of trial of civilians in the military courts has been a subject of litigation. It started in the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court had decided that the trial of civilians in military courts is unconstitutional, and there was an appeal to the Supreme Court. We now have a verdict, and the Supreme Court has decided that all cases that are in the military courts should be transferred to the civilian courts, and that is being done. It started with the case of Dr. Kizza Besigye, who is a prominent opposition leader, and now that file is with the civilians. I believe that it is a step in the right direction. It shows that the government is complying. Now, on the question of abductions and kidnaps, it is illegal for anybody to kidnap another citizen. It is illegal for anybody to abduct another. As the public face of justice, I condemn that. I do not in any way condone it. And I think that if you are enforcing the law, you should still act within the law.
Uganda has been and continues to be on record for gross human rights violation over the years, like arbitrary arrests that we are just talking about and torture. The situation seems to be worsening. Why has this trend persisted?
I do believe that it is important to understand the context of everything that is going on in Uganda. When I became Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, I had meetings with the diplomats, and I told them of what the security agencies in Uganda know. In the run to the elections of 2021, the Ugandan security agencies picked up a conversation between non-citizens, basically a supporter of the leading opposition party. And in that conversation, that supporter, who is a foreigner based in Europe, was responding to a question by the leader of the National Unity Platform. I don't want to mention the name now, but Everybody knows the National Unity Platform, the leading opposition party, and its leader. And the leader of the National Unity Platform was asking why the United Nations does not invoke the responsibility to protect. And then this friend of his based in Europe told him that for that to happen, there should be massive bloodshed. And then he offered his advice saying, if you can mobilize thousands and thousands of people to come to the streets and protest, and the government can be provoked to kill at least 500 people, then the international community can invoke the responsibility to protect. Now, if you are the government and you hear such a conversation, obviously you can't just sit on your hands. You've got to act.
Act by abducting and torturing, or act by reacting lawfully, Honorable Minister?
I can tell you that in that situation, the government of Uganda had to stop anything that would lead to provocation and killings.
How did the government stop it?
The security forces decided to arrest the ringleaders who were planning that mass uprising. Many of them were charged, and unfortunately, some of the cases were mishandled, and the government has admitted some of those mistakes. But my point is that there is a context to what happened, and it is up to you to judge. But it's also important for the Uganda government to explain what led to that. I don't think there's any government that just wakes up and starts abducting people or kidnapping people. I also do not think that every arrest is a kidnap. So I would like us to distinguish between the abduction by overzealous security agencies who are politically motivated, but I also like us to understand the context of security measures that were taken by the Uganda government in order to stop a mass uprising based on incitement by those whose only focus is regime change in Uganda.
So what have you done about these overzealous security officials? What have you done about them?
Number one, you do remember that in the first military operation where the police and the army came to the streets and tried to stop demonstrations, and in that intervention, many people were killed. The official record talks about 60. In that case, the Deputy Inspector General of Police was dismissed. That one is a disciplinary measure. In other cases, other police officers were also subjected to disciplinary measures. Many of the family members were also compensated. In one case, the president of Uganda went to one of the families of somebody who was killed innocently and made a public apology and also compensated them. My main point is not to defend lawlessness by Ugandan security forces. My main point is that those who talk about Uganda should not overlook the context in which everything has been happening.
Minister Mao, you joined government through a political deal with President Museveni, yet he is the same leader being accused of orchestrating these abductions. Does this not amount to double standards, especially when you have also spoken out strongly against abductions, but yet your own government insists these are lawful arrests? How do you justify your position? Why are these injustices escalating under your watch, yet you are the Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs?
As Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, my job is to offer the best possible advice to the government of Uganda. Now, it is not fair for anybody to say the abductions are happening because I'm the Minister of Justice. But he himself went and admitted that what was done by some of the security forces was wrong. And yet he is the overall leader of Uganda. I do not think that if something wrong is done by people who are under your supervision, then that means that your position is untenable. It is actually precisely because of that reason that you should step and take responsibility. I think the president took responsibility. The president has been on record denouncing those acts. Personally, I have been a consistent opponent of any breaches of human rights. I sit in that cabinet, and it's my duty to always point out when there is wrongdoing and to advise that we make amends. In Uganda today, there are two forces. There are those who are projecting the government of Uganda and the president of Uganda as a kind of irredeemable tyrant, that Ugandans can do nothing to improve the situation in the country, and that the only thing that we have to do is to change the president and to change the government. Those are the people I call regime change fundamentalists. But Uganda has a different and a very difficult history. Uganda has had a history of violence and the mass murders. That has been our history. Some of us believe that the time has come in Uganda to talk about a better future, to build a new consensus, to have a government which can have a clean break with the past. And that's why some of us are in this government to talk about even difficult subjects like transition. How can Uganda have peaceful change? So we believe in constructive engagement. I believe that my presence in the government makes me a force for good. I'm in a position to influence certain things. Let me tell you, without voices like mine, you would not have seen someone like Colonel Kizza Besigye in a civilian court. So my position is important because I'm capable of being like a linesman. I can raise the flag when the line has been crossed. And I think voices like mine should give Ugandans hope. It is not my duty to sanitize what is going wrong in the country, but it's my duty to explain to friends of Uganda, because Uganda can easily blow up. Uganda can go the direction of some of the countries that have collapsed. Therefore, the regime change fundamentalists should understand that Uganda is at a delicate point, and we have a responsibility, all of us, to talk to one another, not to simply throw labels to each other. Even when I'm talking to the Uganda government officials, including the president, I tell our president that please don't call every critic an enemy of Uganda. And I also tell the critics of Uganda that it is wrong for you to refer to the government of Uganda as a junta. I'm a minister, but I don't think I'm part of a junta. That is totally unacceptable.
But would you blame people when they end up using that word, especially when we see the president's son coming out on social media as a military man? His language is sometimes very harsh, but then when other opposition figures use such language, then they're abducted, they're tortured, but he's allowed to say anything that he wants, whether even against any other government diplomatically. How does that work, Honorable Minister?
I don't think just because the Chief of Defense Forces, who is the president's son, talks the way he talks, is a justification for others to also use reckless language. The president has talked about the Chief of Defense Forces' comments on social media. He has addressed it as the commander-in-chief, and I think it is up to him to deal with it. He knows what to do to deal with it. It's up to him as commander-in-chief. I don't think it is acceptable, of course, for a Chief of Defense Forces to announce that somebody is supposed to be hanged, or to announce things that are devoid of any due process. And it is important that the president of Uganda deals with that. But unless we are simply interested in moot debates, it is important for us to give the president of Uganda that opportunity to deal with it. I believe even the Chief of Defense Forces should speak to you. We are a government that has a constitution and we have laws. And as Minister for Constitutional Affairs, my duty is to ensure that everybody respects the law. It doesn't matter who. There's nobody who is above the law. That has got to be asserted. So I'm on your side when you say we should draw a line between what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. Now, the only difference is that I am telling you who has the responsibility to deal with that. If I had that responsibility, I would know what to do. So it's our duty to continue pressing the president to take action within the law, because laws are not suggestions. And obedience to the law is mandatory for everyone. But that's not the biggest problem Uganda faces now. Uganda faces people who want to change government unlawfully also. And I think as a person who lived and grew up in Uganda as a young man, a country which faced a lot of violence and bloodshed, I think we need to find a solution. We have examples. Even South Africa is a good example. Even if you need to sit around the table with people you really, really detest and disagree with, for the sake of the future and the sake of our children, we need to do that. That's why the ministry ahead is now working on a national transitional justice law. Under that law, we shall be having a national dialogue and reconciliation process. And in that conversation, that's when we shall be talking about the role of the military. The military has been a very, very important player in Uganda. In fact, they have always intervened and messed up the politics of Uganda. And I believe that in that conversation, we shall talk about the proper role of the military. We have never had a trans-regime army in Uganda. Every government has collapsed with its army, and every new government has come in with its own army. So if we want to build a trans-regime army, then that the character of that army must align with the constitutional aspirations of Ugandans. That is my belief as Minister of Justice. And I cannot contradict those Ugandans who are saying, the army should stay out of partisan politics. The army should guard the state. The army should not be a regime army.
Before we wrap up this discussion, Honorable Minister, I mean, the story of Uganda is a very strong case that we can go on and on, but where are the NUP supporters who were arrested in 2020 during the previous election campaigns like Kibalama and Machete? They've not been seen yet, Minister. Where are they?
The majority of those who were arrested have been released. There are a few cases where even the government does not know where they are, because every once in a while, you hear an announcement from the main opposition party that one of their members is missing. In some cases, some of those members have popped up in foreign countries. But it is the duty of the government to account for the citizens.
Yes.
So for those whose presence, who are not in the prisons, for those whose location we don't know, it's the duty of the government to continue investigating. And we have previously called upon the NUP leaders to cooperate with the government also, to let us know whether they have any information. If such people are dead, then the laws of Uganda say that if in 7 years you are not found, then you will be presumed dead.
Right. But so it's also the same case with Bobi Wine's brother Nyanzi, who was also abducted by armed plainclothes operatives. His whereabouts are also still unknown. 4 NUP Electoral Commission members were abducted, and the vehicle in which they were traveling in was reportedly seen on Google Map in Buya military barracks, Honorable Minister. And family members of Nyanzi reported the case to police, but they said he's not in their custody.
Fortunately, we are able to share whatever information we have. If there's something we don't know officially, then we say we don't know. It is not the duty of unknown security operatives to arrest anybody in Uganda.
Okay. What about the recent one just this Tuesday? NUP MP Derek Nyeko reported that vans locally known as the drones, which are known for abducting people allegedly in Uganda, were surrounding his home in the night. Do you have any comment on that?
What I can tell you is that at the Ministry of Justice, we have even launched a hotline. And I wish such people would use the hotlines for reporting cases of human rights abuses rather than resorting to media drama. Sometimes you have got to take some of these reports with a pinch of salt.
Many thanks to Uganda's Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, Norbert Mao, for joining us. Let me now introduce our correspondent in Kampala, Frank Yiga. Frank, you have heard from the minister delving into what his justice docket is doing to improve human rights, fair trials, and to end abductions of civilians. Now, just to hear from you, what do Ugandans think of the level of impunity by those in power, particularly the first son and commander of Defense Forces, Muhoozi Kainerugaba?
Ugandans at this moment in time are saddened, helpless and hopeless to some extent about the level of impunity by the head of state, President Yoweri Museveni, and his son Muhoozi Kainerugaba. It's because no amount of pressure, no amount of force or means are in place to check them, even when there are strong laws against torture and violation of human rights and dignity. Shockingly, these laws go silent when it comes to who holds the power and calls the shots. We have seen people kidnapped in broad daylight, beaten up, imprisoned without trial, and some have gone missing with no legal action taken. So Ugandans strongly believe that the level of impunity by the head of state and his son have really gone beyond.
Interesting. Now, Frank, do Ugandans have hope, really, that the situation will change for the better anytime soon?
Sentiments like we shall overcome someday sooner than expected, change is coming soon, what some Ugandans talk and sing about with high hopes that the clock is ticking for the current regime. Some people I talked to, said there are as many signs that time has run out. Signals like the escalating torture and abductions at the time when the youth and political activists have become so vocal and fearless. Others said the president is now over 8 years and there's little left in him. So those running the affairs, yes, is what they told me, that the people running the affairs of the government on behalf of the president have no competence to sustain it. So in a nutshell, some Ugandans, especially the young people, are saying the conduct of the government against civilians are signs or kicks of a dying horse.
Right. Now, how much sympathy and support is there for jailed opposition leader Kizza Besigye?
There is massive support for Colonel Kizza Besigye, who is still languishing in jail. It is also important to note that tribal politics is still practiced in Uganda. His tribe mates, for instance, those from western part of Uganda, and many Ugandans across have sympathized with him to a point of some crossing parties, say from the ruling National Resistance Movement, NRM, to the opposition. His incarceration has caused rage among many Ugandans. They speak out publicly about it by accusing the government of gross human rights abuses. Besigye is a senior citizen and veteran politician who has stood the test of time. This definitely makes him an icon of the sort in politics. So he has a huge following of supporters who are sympathizing with the dilemma he's facing. With high hopes, maybe someday, sooner than later, he will be freed.
Right. Thank you so much, our correspondent, Frank Yiga, for joining us from Kampala, Uganda. That's it for this edition of Africa Link. Remember, you are not just a listener, but a crucial part of our community, and your engagement can shape the direction of our discussions. We value your insights and encourage you to share your thoughts with us. Please remember to follow so you can catch all of the Africa Link podcast episodes. This podcast was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabi. My name is Josey Mahachi. Thanks for listening. Until the next one.
DW. Made for minds.